We back here? Okay. Am I okay, Bob? All right.
Yeah.
So I'm just, I hope everybody's going to get a chance this afternoon to get out into this lovely summer weather we're having. A bit cool this morning, but it's warming up. So I'd like to first of all welcome two guests, Melvin Campbell and Mike Haynes. They're both guests of Howard Refuse. Welcome, fellas. Hope you enjoy today's program and that you come out to ongoing meetings. And my only update today is to ensure you all that we are working with the Art Gallery of Burlington with the aim of starting up live meetings this fall. We intend to send out a survey to all of you shortly to get a sense of your willingness to return to live meetings. So I'm going to move right on and at this point and ask Bill Milne to introduce our guest speaker. Okay, over to you, Bill.
It's my pleasure to welcome back our speaker, Commander Robert J. Williamson, CD, Royal Canadian Naval Reserve, retired. I have known Bob for a number of years, and each time I talk to him, he is working on a new talk or historical article. His bio makes me think of the radio commercial that is playing now about a window company who wants to include all the tributes they have received in a 60-second commercial and realizes it should have been 60 seconds. Bob is a graduate of McMaster, a retired Hamilton Secondary School administrator and former commanding officer of Hamilton's Naval Reserve. He was appointed to the Hamilton Historical Board in 1999 and the Plaquing Sub Committee in 2000. His splendid teaching ability and commanding presence made him a natural advocate for promoting our local heritage, having created 50 Canadian heritage speaking topics and history tours. He has resounding 1,300 public speaking appearances to his credit. He has achieved international acclaim with several lectures at American historical conferences and has been a guest speaker at McMaster Alumni Association on many occasions. He is the author and contributing author to 15 books, many of them about groundbreaking heritage subjects. Through the sale of these publications, he has helped to raise funds for the local heritage projects. As a member of the Plaquing Committee, he has composed the wording for 17 City of Hamilton historical plaques. One of his plaques, Victory at Burlington Bay, is at the west end of Spencer Smith Park. He keeps busy enriching our community's heritage by writing a monthly heritage column for the Hamilton Mountain News and occasional stories for the national magazine Our Canada. Bob has received several awards for his heritage work, including the Laura Secord Award, the Reverend Melville Bailey Heritage Award, the City of Hamilton 2006 VIP Award, the Ontario Senior Achievement Award, the Governor General's Caring Canadian Award, the Queen's Diamond Jubilee Medal, the Queen's Medal for Volunteers, and the Naval Association of Canada Silver Medallion. He is an inductee of the McMaster University Alumni Gallery and the Delta Secondary School Alumni Wall of Excellence. Most recently, he was awarded a replica of Queen Victoria's 1847 Naval General Service Medal in association with the Canadian Maritime Heritage Society for his work in preserving the history of the Royal Navy and Provincial Marine during the War of 1812. I'm sure that this last award is related to his talk today, and I'm wondering if he's wearing the medal also on this uniform that he's wearing today. So I'm going to turn it over to Bob for his topic, Hamilton and Scourge. Thank you, Bob.
Bob's muted.
I think we're okay now. Yes, you are, Bob. Go ahead. All right, thank you. Thanks to my Navy colleague, Bill Milne, for that introduction. We both share a vested interest in the promotion of our naval heritage, having received our Royal Canadian Navy commissions through the University Naval Training Program at McMaster University and our local Naval Reserve Division here in Hamilton, HMCS Star. Special thank you also to the Provost Club in Burlington and your video technicians who have run through this with me, and I feel quite comfortable in this presentation. And for providing the opportunity to share our naval heritage with you this morning. As you will see, Burlington plays a significant role in the evolution of this unique story of discovery. So, without further ado, let's get underway. The world's best preserved shipwrecks are right here in Hamilton. And I'd like to talk about discovering the schooners, the Hamilton, the Scourge. There are two naval national historic sites in the Hamilton area. The largest is the World War II Tribal class destroyer, HMCS Haida, the last of her type and a world-class tourist attraction. The other national historic site of Canada, created in 1976, is owned and managed by the city of Hamilton and lies at the bottom of Lake Ontario. 90 meters or 300 feet below the water surface sit two World War 1812 warships. The USS Hamilton and the USS Scourge, and they're almost in pristine condition. Alderman Bill McCullough, a retired Naval Reserve colleague from HMCS Star, convinced the city in 1980 to create a Hamilton and Scourge Foundation and acquired ownership of those vessels for their naval museum potential. So here we see one National Historic Site on the bay shore beside HMCS Star, and this is the memorial garden for the other National Historic Site. With the ships being inaccessible, the city established a memorial garden for the ships and their crews through the Hamilton Conservation Authority. Situated in Confederation Park, it overlooks the waterscape where the ship sank in Lake Ontario, almost 20 miles to the east in that direction. The 53 headstones identify each crew member and their symbolic graves of the American sailors who lie on the bottom of the lake with their ships. The 65-foot-long brick pathway, which you can just make out here, represents the ghostly outline of a schooner extending from the cedar tree, which would be the stern right there, to the western end of the bricks, which would be the bow just off the picture to the right. The flagpole represents the mainmast. Imagine, if you will, the foremast just ahead of the first line of graves right here. And between the two masts, a swivel cannon right there. On the grass verge, 4 carronades on each side along here. On the main mast, flags forever flying in remembrance. During the last 15 years, I have participated in regular memorial services held close to the anniversary date of the sinking on August the 8th, 1813. Veteran groups, diplomats, sailors from the United States are invited to participate in the commemoration at Confederation Park or other related venues. Good neighbor congeniality abounds, and using anecdotes, I recall the role these converted schooners play as gunboats in naval control of Lake Ontario and the overlooked contributions that the Navy made during the War of 1812. In 2004, there was a combined memorial service for the Battle of Stony Creek and the sinking of the Hamilton and Scourge, although they are literally 2 months apart. And that's the reason for this gathering of British redcoats and reenactors in sailors' uniforms. Here are the American officials, local officials, my wife dressed in 1812 costume, and I am standing at the podium. Did you know that the Navy had a significant role in the Battle of Stony Creek? That makes this appropriate to have brought the two events together in one. More about that later. Then in 2012, at Pier 9, the USS Hurricane and the HMCS Ville de Quebec came alongside its star, and that made a perfect international high-profile venue for the memorial service for Hamilton and Scourge. Again, we see the sailors and the redcoats, as well as the Star Band and other officials, and I'm standing at the microphone here. In 2013, we had a very different memorial service in which the Canadian Coast Guard ship Griffin took the service out to the site where the ships sank off Port Weller. Here you see some of the official guests as the ship returns to Port Weller after the ceremony. We have a couple of reenactors. This one is Gil Bibby, who is the chairman of the Hamilton Scourge Foundation. We have a naval veteran. There were several of them on board. And Mayor Bertina, myself as MC, and MPP Monique Taylor sits in the background, sitting on the quarterdeck as the ship returns to Port Weller. So those are just a few of the unique ceremonies that were held. I could go through more, but I think in the sake of time, that would be enough of an illustration of the various venues that are held for the memorial service each year. As a former chairman of the City Plaquing Sub Committee, while I was checking the Hamilton and Scourge Memorial site in October, I can't remember the exact date, 2017, I noted that a small memorial plaque was missing from a stone cairn. I'm leaning on the bench overlooking the cairn, and the grave sites are in the background. There's that brick pathway that I told you about earlier. When I noticed this plaque was missing, this set the stage for the rest of my story. It said, in recognition of Captain Archie Hodge, to acknowledge his contribution and years of dedication to the Hamilton and Scourge Society. Captain Archie Hodge was the commander of the vessel, which is not named on this plaque. In 1973, found the archaeological treasures, the Hamilton and the Scourge. I reported the vandalism to the City Tourism and Culture Division. Chris Redford, who is the coordinator of Heritage Presentation, an old friend of mine from my days on the historical board. And he went to work immediately reproducing a new plaque, and this is what he came up with. Exactly the same wording, except it now adds the research vessel Port Dauphine. During my tenure as chairman of the city's Plaquing Committee, I recommended that we should use composite materials instead of brass and other valuable metals to reduce vandalism and introduce images to make commemorative plaques more comprehensive. As coordinator of Heritage Presentation, Chris Redford went to work, took my directive, and created this new information plaque. Discovering the Hamilton and the Scourge is an illustrated story on a commemorative plaque. It commemorates the three men that were closely involved in the discovery, illustrates the layout of the two ships, the Hamilton. There's its cannon that's between the two masts that I pointed out to you earlier, and the Scourge, of course, which also sank in the same vicinity. It tells some stories about the sinking and how it came about, and also shows illustrations of what the camera has seen at the bottom of Lake Ontario. Here we see the image figurehead of Lord Nelson, because that was the actual name of the Scourge before the Americans captured her. And Lady Hamilton, Lady Diana was the name of the Hamilton before she was taken into service with the Navy. This shows some of the bones lying at the lake bed. So this is what we have now at the site of the memorial. And here's some close-ups of the men that were very important to the discovery of the Hamilton and the Scourge. This project was initiated in 1971 when Dr. Dan Nelson of St. Catharines and Professor Douglas Tushingham of the Royal Ontario Museum began a search to locate the ships. This is Dr. Nelson, who is a dentist, now deceased, and his colleague, Professor Douglas Tushingham of the Royal Museum. The photo is courtesy of his daughter, Margot Tushingham. More about her later. While searching for possible navigational clues in the records of the United States Naval Archives, Dr. Nelson made a fortuitous discovery. a discovery that would resolve many unanswered questions about the naval war on Lake Ontario in the summer of 1813. To his great surprise, Dr. Nelson discovered the long-lost logbook of HMS Wolfe, the 1813 British flagship on Lake Ontario. Because all the recorded details of the British squadron's activities had been hidden away for almost 200 years, the Canadian aspect of the war was underplayed in our history books, giving the Americans a free hand in writing their version of events. And this is the logbook that Dr. Nelson discovered. Journal of HMS Wolfe, later named Montreal, flagship of Sir James Yeo on Lake Ontario, June 8 to December 20th, 1813. And it was found in the National Archives, Recorded General Service Administration, Washington in 1971. And Dr. Nelson brought a copy of that back to Canada. And it just so happens that I ended up getting a copy of the copy. And it's the only one that's in this area. The interesting question is, how did the logbook end up in the Washington archives? Well, my research shows that what likely happened is that Captain Downey, who was in command of the Montreal, or former Wolfe, in 1814, was moved from command on Lake Ontario to a ship on Lake Champlain, where he went to war with Captain McDonough at Plattsburgh. And it turns out that the logbook was actually sent to Washington from Plattsburgh, which would tell us that Downey must have had the logbook in his possession when he went into battle at Plattsburgh and was killed and his ship captured. And obviously McDonough sent the log to Washington. So this was a great discovery, not only for the Hamilton and the Scourge, but for our entire naval history during the summer of 1813. And here's an example of the role it played in finding the Hamilton and the Scourge. This entry provided information that Dr. Nelson was looking for. It says, remarks HMS Wolfe cruising on Lake Ontario on Sunday, the 8th of August, 1813. AM, light breezes, variable. It was very warm. Weather at 5, hot. 40 Mile Creek bore south-southwest, distance about 8 miles, wind southerly. Saw the enemy squadron bearing east and by south about 4 or 5 leagues. Standing to the westward on the larboard tack, we made sail and stood towards them. Little did the navigator on HMS Wolfe realize that he was recording a very significant piece of history. What would he have thought if he had realized that the American ships at sunrise were in fact doing a search and rescue for the Hamilton and the Scourge, and he in fact now had recorded the location of where they went down? Just the information that Dr. Nelson was looking for. Now, if we can translate this into a modern map, it would look like this. Here's the location of the Wolfe. The navigator took a sighting on a 40 Mile Creek, which is where Grimsby is today. And it's wrote down south-southwest, a bearing of south-southwest, approximately 8 miles. And a bearing on the American squadron, east and by south 4 or 5 leagues. So in this box is where the Hamilton, the Scourge, sank. Now, I said that the discovery of the log was fortuitous because it provided much more information and missing information about our naval war and events on Lake Ontario. And here are some more examples. For example, the Battle of Stony Creek. Remember, I mentioned earlier that the Navy was involved in the Battle of Stony Creek, and you probably thought I was joking. Well, here's the proof. This is a report sent by Commodore Yeo from His Majesty's ship Wolfe at Kingston, Upper Canada, 27th of June, 1813. This, in fact, is his monthly report that he sent to his commanders. Sirs, I have the honor to inform you for the information of the Lords of Commission of the Admiralty that on the 3rd of this instant, in case this would be June, 3rd of June, I sailed with His Majesty's squadron under my command from this port, Kingston, to cooperate with our army at the head of the lake and annoy the enemy by intercepting all of their supplies. This is 5 days before the actual, this is 3 days before the actual Battle of Stony Creek. So Wolfe and his squadron were on their way to the head of the lake. This plays a very important role in the history of the Battle of Stony Creek. And here I'm going to illustrate to you how the Navy played a significant role. This is a piece of information that I thought was very, very important. And so as a member of the Plaquing Committee, I drew up this plaque and submitted it for the bicentennial period. This just shows you the format that is used in putting in an entry for a plaque, the introduction, in keeping with the city's 1812 bicentennial plaquing project. This proposal fills a huge gap in the understanding of why the Battle of Stony Creek was so essential in Canadian history. It provides information not covered on other battlefields, historic plaques, and will help the public understand why the British undertook such a reckless action at Stony Creek. The format, standard procedure, 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph shows how the future of Upper Canada was at stake. Second paragraph shows why the British were desperate and needed to play for time. And the third paragraph describes what was the result of Colonel Harvey's desperate delaying action. Finally, it provides the wow factor, the arrival of the relief squadron just in time. So this is what we have discovered from the information provided in the log of the Wolf. To truly understand the Battle of Stony Creek, we must appreciate what was going on in the mind of General Vincent, commander of the British forces at the head of Lake Ontario, June the 5th, 1813. He was holding a key defensive position on Burlington Heights, which controlled the supply routes to the British Army and Navy on the Detroit frontier. If the Americans captured Vincent's position, then the entire British force on the western frontier would be cut off and forced to surrender. Eventually, all of Upper Canada west of Kingston would be lost. Vincent's fortifications on Burlington Heights were under construction and woefully incapable of withstanding a major attack by a vastly superior force now camped on his doorstep at Stony Creek. However, he knew that an army of reinforcements and desperately requested supplies were on their way from Kingston with Commodore Yo's fleet and due to arrive in probably 24 hours. The problem was he needed time. As Vincent sat with his senior officers in his Burlington Heights headquarters on June the 5th, Lieutenant Colonel Harvey convinced them that to buy time, they must make a daring night raid on the American camp, hoping to create enough destruction and confusion to delay the American advance on Burlington Heights. The plan worked. The Americans withdrew to their advanced base at 40 Mile Creek, Grimsby, to regroup and resupply. They were ready to again move against Burlington Heights on June the 8th when the British fleet showed up, like the cavalry in a Western movie. The British gamble had paid off and the American army abandoned all their supplies, making a hasty withdrawal to the Niagara River. So here we have a chance to rewrite history, that we have missing information that wasn't available before, but now is written in the log of the wolf. What's interesting is that the plaque includes previously omitted information about the engagement at the 40 on June the 8th, 1813, the timely arrival of the British squadron after the Battle of Stony Creek, which put the Americans into full retreat. In short, it gives us the big picture. Most of the plaques in the Stony Creek tell us only the myopic view of what happened on the battlefield, but doesn't explain why the battle took place. This Grimsby sketch that I made from the facts provided by the Log of the Wolf puts in picture form what exactly happened on the 8th of June and the important role that the Navy played in the victory on the Niagara Peninsula on June the 8th, 6-8, 1813. The British squadron, having arrived from Kingston, swings around in front of the 40 Mile Creek, which is here. The Americans are unloading bateaux with fresh supplies that they had quickly abandoned in the night of 6th of June. And once the Americans see the British have command of Lake Ontario, they immediately head for home, which is the Niagara River. Again, leaving behind all their supplies. And it was Christmas for the Navy, all the food and ammunition that was left behind by the Americans. So the Navy played a significant role in turning the Americans away after the Battle of Stony Creek. So this would be Hamilton in the background. Head of the lake, Toronto or York would be over here. And the federal government did put up a small plaque called Engagement at the 40. You can tell it's a government plaque because it's in English and French, but we'll only deal with the English. Here at the 40 Mile Creek on the 8th of June, 1813, American forces retreating after the Battle of Stony Creek were bombarded by a British flotilla under James Lucas Yo, Indians and groups of the 4th and 5th Regiment of the Lincoln Militia. They joined in the attack and created such confusion in the enemy ranks that they abandoned this position and retreated to Fort George. The rest of the story of the Battle of Stony Creek, which has been missing for 200 years. And more information provided by the Log of the Wolf. It revealed the truth about what happened at the pivotal naval battle of Burlington on September the 28th, 1813. This would be the naval equivalent of the Battle of Stony Creek. Happened 2 months later, 3 months later. A battle for naval control of Lake Ontario. Because so little was known about the engagement, it was facetiously called the Burlington Races. And this is the plaque that was put up before the Log of the Wolf was discovered. And it says, on the morning of September the 28th, 1813, a powerfully armed United States fleet comprising 10 ships under the command of Commodore Isaac Chauncey appeared off York. The smaller British fleet of 6 vessels, commanded by Commodore Sir James Yeo, was in the harbor, but on the approach of the enemy set sail to attack. All of that is recorded history and quite correct. Now we get into the nitty-gritty of what really did happen. After a sharp engagement, the British squadron was forced to withdraw towards Burlington Bay. It says that in the log, where it could take refuge under the batteries of the adjacent heights. Doesn't say that in the log. A close chase ensued, but by skillful seamanship, Yeo was able to bring the ships through the shallow channel in the sandbar to the safety of this bay. It doesn't say that in the Log of the Wolf. So this is someone's interpretation of what happened because information was missing. What really did happen? What did the log say? The log said that the Wolf and the squadron anchored with springs on their cables close inshore off Burlington Bay. And here's an illustration of what we're talking about. A hawser would be wrapped around the anchor and hauled back to the stern as the ship sailed in towards the head of the lake, furling their sails and anchored by the stern. What had happened was the flagship, the Wolf, had suffered some sail damage and had a loss of maneuverability. So there's no way she was going to try and go through a shallow outlet into the bay, plus the fact that the outlet was only 5 feet deep. These ships draw at least 15 feet. So there's no way that they could have entered the bay, as historians said. So the log is right. Well, it has to be right because it was an eyewitness account. They anchored close inshore so the enemy couldn't get behind them, with springs on their cables so that they could then turn into the wind during the battle and therefore gain a form of maneuverability to fight against the enemy that was chasing them. And so we rewrote the plaque, and it's been placed not at Dundurn Castle, where nothing of the sort took place. It's placed out by the banquet center on the beach at Confederation Park, not far from the memorial grounds for the Hamilton Scourge. In the background is Burlington. This is where the actual engagement took place. They anchored close inshore with springs on their cables, but Hamilton can't put a plaque in Burlington, so we put the plaque here in front of the banquet center at Lakeview at Confederation Park. When Burlington saw what we had done, they asked if I would write up a version of this for them to put in their lakeshore, which I did. So it's now covered correctly in 2 places, Burlington and here in Hamilton. The commemorative plaque that you saw earlier goes on to explain from an eyewitness what happened when the Hamilton and the Scourge went down. One of the survivors, Ned Meyer, said, "The flashes of lightning were incessant. Suddenly the ships heeled over and crew members were trapped under heavy objects and cannons that had tumbled to leeward. Then water began to pour down the cabin companionway like a sluice." So the ships, as you see in this painting, were caught in a sudden violent storm, typical of August summer on Lake Ontario. It was night. They couldn't see the storm coming. They were becalmed, had put every stitch of sail out that they could to try and get away from the British, who didn't have long-range guns and wanted to be able to get in close with their carronades, and the Americans were trying to keep away from them. And they, under these conditions, were hit by this sudden squall, and all the ships heeled over, but the two that failed to right were the Hamilton and the Scourge, because they were converted schooners, commercial vessels built to carry weights in their hold, not on their deck. And here they are now loaded down with 8 and 9 cannons on the upper deck. So they heeled over and with all sails set, and they never did right. I started this story of discovery with the replacement of the Archie Hodge dedication plaque. There are some very interesting connections to his role in this story. It began during World War II, when Archie, as a Royal Navy officer, came to Canada to take delivery of a Canadian-built anti-submarine corvette designed to protect North Atlantic convoys from German submarines. After the war, he transferred from the Royal Navy to the Royal Canadian Navy and was assigned to Naval Reserve Headquarters in Hamilton for the Great Lakes, attached at HMCS Star. When I joined Star as a junior officer, my wife and I became part of the same social circles, and we became very good friends with Archie. And he was the life of a wardroom party. He loved dress-up pantomimes, sing-alongs, and recitations. Everyone loved his naval parodies, such as tongue-in-cheek rendition of the famous British victory at Trafalgar in 1805. When the Naval Reserve Headquarters moved to Halifax, Archie didn't want to leave Hamilton, so he transferred to the Coast Guard at Canada's Centre for Inland Waters in Burlington, where he took command of their research vessel and was assigned to the Hamilton and Scourge project. Searching for the site of 2 small sunken ships 160 years after the fact, even with their approximate location known, was like looking for a needle in a haystack. The search had ended unsuccessfully in the autumn of 1973, when the Hamilton resident Captain Archie Hodge turned his research vessel, the Port Dauphine, for home at Canada's Centre for Inland Waters. He dropped Dr. Nelson off in St. Catharines and headed back to Hamilton. As a World War II naval veteran who had spent the war searching for submarines in the depths of the North Atlantic, Archie decided to put down his sonar one last time. His veteran instincts paid off. the world's best preserved 1812 era shipwrecks were found. Dr. Nelson was a little pissed off, quite frankly, because he wasn't on board. However, Archie did report the find to Dr. Nelson, and they went back the next summer and sure enough confirmed that they did find the ships. Note the position of the port side guns, showing that the Scourge had rolled to the left before sinking. Port side guns all dumped through the portholes. Here, the guns had rolled back from the portholes, but pristine condition. If they were raised, probably could be put to sale. This is the Scourge. So this would be Lord Nelson, figurehead here. He had 10 guns, 5 on each side. They were all carronades, very heavy duty guns, but short range. Whereas the Hamilton had a swivel gun in this location, long range gun. In 2008, at the memorial service at Confederation Park, Councillor Judy Partridge and Hamilton and Scourge National Historic Site Coordinator Michael McMaster unveiled Hodge's replacement plaque. During his 20 years in the Canadian Coast Guard, Archie Hodge rescued a total of 12 people from the lake and was the first to respond to the Edmund Fitzgerald sinking in November of 1976. He was passed over for the Order of Ontario, but was appointed a Fellow of the Royal Geographical Society. I submitted the nomination for the Order of Ontario, but I realized that he didn't have the political clout. So I am pleased that he did receive the Royal Geographical Society award. The City of Hamilton, represented by Councillor Judy Partridge on the left, presented a commemorative plaque entitled Discovering the Hamilton and the Scourge to the Naval Memorial Garden in Confederation Park on Sunday, August the 5th, 2018. Margot Tushingham, daughter of the late Professor Tushingham, was there honoring his role as a member of the discovery team at the unveiling. So now we have the complete story on site. The comprehensive format of the Hamilton and Scourge Commemorative Discovery Plaque tells an amazing story apropos the National Historic status of the site, taking into consideration other local naval heritage sites like Haida, HMCS Stars Museum, the Ramillies Bell in that museum, an artifact representing the German raider phase of the Battle of the Atlantic, the Dieppe Memorial beside the canal, the beach, and the naval plaques that I've been talking about along the shore at Lakeview Banquet Center, Grimsby, and Burlington. There is a significant naval heritage presence in our community. Unfortunately, the naval aspect of the Battle of Stony Creek is still overlooked. The plaque that I had drafted was not installed when they ran out of money. In keeping with former Alderman Bill McCullough's vision of creating a world-class naval tourist attraction, the Hamilton-Burlington region has entered the spotlight of Canadian naval heritage preservation. An important reason for that is the Hamilton Scourge research initiated by Dr. Nelson. In addition, it has resulted in the discovery of an equally important prize, the long-lost naval log of HMS Wolfe. That concludes the program. Thank you very much for watching. And I believe we're now open for questions. And I'd be happy to speak to anyone who does have a question or would like more information about what they've heard.
All right, so to help us with asking questions, as usual, if you have a question, please raise your hand and Gary will recognize you, at which point please take yourself off mute, ask the commander your question, and then go back on mute. Okay, thanks very much.
I think Brian Patrick, you have the first question. Go ahead and unmute.
Yeah, I had I think you made some good points about the fact that the historians here really missed the boat on reporting some of this stuff. And I'm wondering if it's because most of the historians, we weren't a country at that point, were in Britain. Britain also had a European war going on, and I'm kind of wondering if we were an afterthought. They did provide some ships, but I think their vast resources, much of their Navy was involved in Europe at the time. Would that not be correct?
Yes, that was very, very true. This was a totally overlooked aspect of the Napoleonic Wars. And it's only of concern to Canadians. Unfortunately, Canada didn't exist as a nation back then. And in fact, the Canadian government, even in 1867, ignored anything that happened before that period of time. And of course, the British weren't interested because that was so earlier in their history and wasn't part of their national history, and nothing as important as Napoleon. So yes, you're absolutely right, totally overlooked. And that's one of the reasons why I've been making my efforts to make sure that this information is put out there for the public, because Burlington played a significant role in the Burlington races. That was the equivalent of saving Canada, and yet it was never played up at all. In fact, until we got the wording and Burlington put up the plaque about the Burlington, correcting the Burlington races, Burlington would never have got any recognition at all, and yet it was every bit as significant as Stony Creek. So now Burlington has a plaque, but Stony Creek never got the plaque that I had written for them. So they're a little short on the history too. So you've got the advantage of the Burlington race's truth, whereas Stony Creek doesn't know how the Navy was involved. Thank you for that question. That was a good one.
Dave Rokas, you have.
Gary? Okay.
Yes, I understand that Yo's squadron was stationed out of Kingston. During the summer of 1813, did they remain, did the squadron remain in the Burlington area, or did it return to Kingston and then come back for the Burlington races in September?
No, they continued to control Lake Ontario through most of 1813. And that was one of the saving graces of why the British were able to hang on until they were able to build their force up big enough to build bigger ships. And so the Americans never did really fully regain any control of Lake Ontario. If they had, you'd be voting for an American president today. So Burlington races, is that important? And people in Burlington have to think about that. Had the British squadron lost the Burlington Races battle, you'd be saluting American flags.
Kevin, you had a question?
Yeah, I was interestingly, the Canadians have created a memorial site for American ships. Why did not, once these ships were discovered, why didn't the US come along and say, these are our ships, they're preserved, we lost them, we want to take control of them, we want to create some sort of memorial. Why did Canada do a memorial of American ships?
Very good question. Thank you for that. Primarily, the answer is they're in Canadian water. They sank just off Port Weller, and so the Americans can't touch them. It would only be through our generosity that we shared them with them, and I think we should have. Unfortunately, we didn't, because if we had shared the discovery with the Americans, I'm quite sure one of those ships would be up on the surface today. However, that never happened, and so that advantage of turning that into a really great historic site was lost. But that's the reason they're in Canadian water, and the Americans couldn't touch them, only with our courtesy, and we never gave it to them, which is sad. We should have.
Next question. Bob, I think you've taken all the wind out of everybody. There's no more questions that I can see. I had one question for you, Bob, and I asked you earlier. We can see the top half of the uniform. Is there a bottom half, or are you sitting there in shorts?
Yes, the bottom half does exist. My wife made the entire costume, by the way. She's quite a seamstress. When I asked her if she could do that, she said, well, I don't have a pattern. So I gave her a picture of Lord Nelson, and I said, it looks like this. She took that picture and made a pattern and turned in a uniform that would be something similar to what Commodore Yo would have worn on Lake Ontario.
Looks very good. I'm not seeing any more hands, so I think we'll stop the Q&A. Ken, you are wrapped.
Yeah, no, okay, well, thank you, Gary, and thank you, sir, for a very, very informative talk about an important part of our local history. And we all appreciate your many years of obvious dedicated effort, and we'd like to recognize that you have done a lot to preserve the naval history of the Hamilton and Scourge. So thank you very much, and with our thanks, you're free to leave port. So
Thank you very much, Ken.
Thank you. Thanks again. It was really good. We're going to, as usual, upload the recording of today's presentation to YouTube, but we're having a few technical difficulties, so it may be delayed getting uploaded. So just hang in there and you'll see it. And just to let you know that next month, our speaker is going to be Dr. Chandros. He's going to be speaking about human potential and the future of mankind. So thanks again. And at this point, the recording is going to stop. And